The High Republic just recently completed its first of 3 phases, and I have loved this era of storytelling to death. It's one of my favorite things Star Wars has done since the Disney acquisition. We have to wait until October for Phase 2, so now seems like a good time to review everything that's come out so far. Not individually. If you want to know how I feel about each book or comic, you can look back at my previous videos. I want to talk about the High Republic initiative as a whole. Why is it so great, and what do I think could be improved upon in the second and third phases? When the High Republic was first being teased as Project Luminous, my hope was that it would be a return to the Star Wars Legends days of Star Wars storytelling. Back then, especially in the 90s before the prequels, there weren't any movies coming out. There were no Disney Plus series. There weren't any huge Star Wars releases like today. There certainly weren't multiple in a year like we're getting in 2022. We are truly spoiled now. So it was up to the books and comics to be the backbone of Star Wars storytelling, to drive the universe forward. So those books and comics got to tell big stories with galactic consequences. Even after the prequels, we were still getting these long series of books like The New Jedi Order. The books obviously varied in quality, they weren't all amazing, but they all felt important. Cut to the Disney acquisition, and the books and comics felt like they were kind of set aside. We had movies coming out again, one every year. There were animated series on television, and I'm sure discussions of live-action television were already happening. Obviously, the movies were going to tell those bigger stories, and books and comics seemed to be largely relegated to supporting materials for the films and series. Books like A New Dawn, Phasma, Thrawn, and Rebel Rising, which were all enjoyable reads, but they were focused on filling in backstory for characters from the films and Star Wars Rebels. They didn't get to tell their own stories, and I missed that. But the High Republic has scratched that itch for me. Claudia Gray, Justina Ireland, Daniel Jose Older, Cavan Scott, and Charles Soule have created a new era of Star Wars with new characters. The High Republic isn't connected to any other Star Wars media. Most of the characters are new, and we've never known much about this point in the timeline. So they're getting to tell a story that feels big and important with major consequences, just like the Legends days. What's more is the High Republic is arguably the most ambitious publishing project Star Wars has ever done. Phase 1 alone had 3 novels, 3 young adult novels, 3 middle grade books, an audio drama, 2 volumes of a manga, several short stories, and over 30 comic issues spread out over multiple series. If we keep up that pace for the next 2 phases, the novels alone will be comparable to something like Legacy of the Force, which had 9 novels as well, and that's not including everything else. This initiative is huge, and yet you don't have to read all of it. You could read just the main novels, for example, and get a pretty clear picture of the era. But as a fan who does read everything Star Wars has to offer, the High Republic has been insanely fun and rewarding. Part of that is down to the writers' collective commitment to strong collaboration and planning. Having spoken with all of them at some point, it's clear they put in a lot of extra work together to make sure their stories weave together naturally. Race to Crash Point Tower and The Rising Storm, for example, take place at the same place and the same time, and their intersections were very well done. Same with The Fallen Star and the Marvel High Republic comic. It's hard enough to write a story on your own, but to write a story that perfectly fits in with someone else's sounds like a ton of extra work. I imagine it's made slightly easier because all 5 authors sat down and mapped out all 3 phases before they began writing. I'm not trying to turn this into a debate about whether or not a story has to be perfectly and meticulously planned to be successful. But again, the team behind the High Republic has put in so much work into this era, and it shows. They know the major story beats, but they still allow for flexibility in how to reach each one. I know there was a surprising character death in Book 1 that wasn't planned from the start, but it worked for the story, and so they shifted. I think that's a perfect approach. Have the outline, but don't become so attached to it that it can never be changed. It's a very Jedi way of thinking, actually. Which is a good way to describe all 5 writers. I don't like to make sweeping statements like, they understand Star Wars, because Star Wars means something different to everyone. But their understanding of Star Wars lines up with mine. They have a near perfect blend of pulpy action and strong themes about what it means to be a Jedi and what it means to stand up for light and life. More important than having a plan is consistency in messaging. I think Gray, Ireland, Older, Scott, and Soule all all know and agree on what they want to say with their stories, and I love that feeling that they're all on the same team. It makes me trust them, even when something happens that I'm unsure about. Like the fact that Phase 2 is going to jump backwards in time over a century. My first instinct was to be a little annoyed, because I am desperate to know what happens to the current cast of characters. Now I have to leave them behind for who knows how long? But the writers haven't disappointed me yet, so I trust that they know best how to tell their own story. And not long after that announcement, some of the final stories of Phase 1 got me actively excited for the time jump, and I can see that they've been sprinkling clues about it since the beginning of the initiative. As we prepare for Phase 2 and the time jump, the one main criticism I think I have is that I want the High Republic to be longer. Phase 1 moved at a very fast pace. I would much rather the story be efficient and move quickly instead of drag, but I think some of the payoff of the final stories could have been more impactful if we had spent more time with certain characters or locations. That death in the Fallen Star that I mentioned was surprising and well done, but I didn't feel as connected with that character as I did others. It's also no big secret that Starlight Beacon falls in that book, and I felt the same way. Starlight Beacon was big and important and present, but I just didn't feel connected to it. I think a fourth wave of stories would have been beneficial to give us a little more time with all these new characters and places. Because these stories can be overwhelming. I've heard from several people that they're having trouble keeping up with everyone. It hasn't bugged me personally. I feel like reading stories like A Song of Ice and Fire with massive casts has prepared me for the High Republic. But moving into Phase 2, where I assume we will again meet a bunch of new people, I wouldn't mind slowing things down just a bit. I wonder if Phase 1 moved so quickly because it was a bit of an experiment. Nobody knew how fans would respond, so the plan may have been to move the story along very quickly. But the response has been strong, with many of the books hitting bestseller lists and several comic issues getting reprintings. Lydia Kang, Tessa Gratton, Zoraida Cordova, and George Mann are all joining the writing staff for Phase 2, so maybe that's a sign that there will be more waves to look forward to. I would love that, and it's such a relief that my biggest criticism of the High Republic is that I want more of it. Relief is a good way of expressing how I feel with this era as a whole. I'm relieved I love it so much, because it's gonna continue coming out for years. As expected, some stories didn't resound with me as much as others, but they have been consistently enjoyable. Even the books I didn't like as much had big moments that made me pump my fist. In my review for the first wave of stories over a year ago, I said they collectively bought me into the era, to the point where I'm just in. It's basically how I feel about Star Wars as a whole. It's an entire universe that I love, and I'm willing to give all of it a shot. I know not every book or comic or series or movie will be my favorite, but I know I'll have a good time. The High Republic has consistently delivered some of my favorite new books and comics. I would count Light of the Jedi, The Rising Storm, and Midnight Horizon among my favorite Star Wars books of all time. Trail of Shadows is one of the best Star Wars comics I've ever read, and the Marvel comic kept me hooked for 15 issues straight. Every wave so far has delivered something I would consider to be top-tier Star Wars. Claudia Gray, Justina Ireland, Daniel Jose Older, Cavan Scott, and Charles Soule have cemented the High Republic as a bona fide Star Wars era, and now beyond the books and comics and everything they've written, I can't wait to see how the era expands into other media. I do want to point out that the High Republic isn't for everyone. I've seen people online saying they gave it a shot and it just didn't speak to them, and that's fine. Like I said earlier, everyone sees Star Wars differently. Nobody loves Star Wars in exactly the same way. My hope for those fans that didn't get what they wanted here is that the publishing world does something similar when Phase 3 is complete. I love the idea of letting a team of writers develop a corner of the Star Wars galaxy together. They tell their story, and it can grow and evolve from there. And hopefully those fans that weren't swept up in the High Republic get something for them. I would love to see the development process behind the High Republic be repeated over and over again to introduce us to new characters, new locations, and new ideas in the Star Wars universe, because this has been some of the most fun I've had diving into Star Wars content in a long time. If you haven't given the High Republic a shot yet, but I convinced you, just start with Light of the Jedi by Charles Soule. From there, decide your own level of interest. I think reading the Marvel comic and the adult novels will give you a satisfying picture of the era, but if you're extra intrigued, add in the young adult novels and the High Republic adventures and then the middle grade novels. You've got 7 months before the start of Phase 2 anyway. But that's all I have to say about the High Republic for today. I love it, and I hope more Star Wars fans continue to check it out. I'll be covering it more next week to talk about more specific moments and characters from the first phase that I loved, so make sure to subscribe to the channel to see that. If you haven't already, please like this video, follow us on TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram, and consider checking out our Patreon page where we hold book clubs for the High Republic and every Star Wars book that comes out. As always, thanks for watching, and may the Force be with you.